Okay, so we are actually recording the video now, and um Matthew is here and he will help you out for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, so you wanted to run slides from,
He's gonna write some from there.
Slides.
Of the front facing camera. And then she just needs to share some audio. It's already been set up.
okay, cool.
Yeah.
So just one. That's competitive access to the line.
Except Virginia.
Oh, Virginia, okay.
Give it a couple minutes. No, everyone's finishing their coffee and snacks.
Are you coming to the dinner?
Yeah, I'll be there.
For sure. Excellent.
Yeah, is you with us?
It's cute.
Does it?
It does here, I mean, through the phones.
Good mic.
The room is connected to this, so probably not in
Oh,
our camera.
okay.
What is better, I guess, you on camera or we could switch maybe once you're done talking, we could switch the camera on here. I think we could both. Yeah, so the integrated camera's on now. So
Okay. We can. Also, I mean, can't you always see my,
Okay, if that's better than, or what you prefer. then
yeah, we'll switch it to the.
Sure. I think this is the room. Okay.
And actually, if I speak, is it gonna turn to it? Yeah.
Well, maybe you're loud enough to it.
All right, I think we're gonna get started. I'm gonna turn this way a little bit. Good morning, I'm co-moderating this session with Virginia Millington. This is in the aftermath of change toward a model of resilience and documentation in the age of climate change. We're gonna have a really excellent panel today. Pull up my notes. I will first introduce myself. I'm Patty Devery. I'm the Associate Director of the Archive at StoryCorps. I started at StoryCorps full-time, day one of the COVID-19 pandemic, March 16th, 2020. I won't forget my start date. I previously worked at the New York City Department of Environmental Protection and also at the the George Lois Big Idea collection at CUNY, City College of New York, and I hold a master's degree in library science from Queens College with a certificate in archives and preservation of cultural heritage materials. We also have with us today Acacia Thompson. Acacia is the Brooklyn Public Library's Environmental Justice Coordinator at the Greenpoint Library and Environmental Education Center. Acacia's work is focused on environmental issues and education and promoting equity. She's an active community member working with environmental organizations and spearheading projects in open space equity, street tree stewardship, and school and environmental education. Teague Schneiter, her is a moving image archivist, memory worker, educator, and strategist who has spent her 15-year career working in moving image, culture, heritage, digital rights, technology, and DEI initiatives. She founded and led the Academy of Motion Pictures Oral History Program for 12 years and currently leads fundraising and strategic partnerships for a human rights focused nonprofit advancing access to privacy-first tools for at-risk communities. She also co-leads the EMEA Pathways Fellowship Program, which StoryCorps has participated in, and I encourage you all to look into. And the Autistic Voices Oral History Project, and teaches the online library program at Louisiana State University. Casey Davis is an archivist, oral historian, and fundraising strategist with 15 years of experience mobilizing people and resources across the cultural heritage, public broadcasting, digital rights, climate and conservation, and neurodiversity advocacy sectors. She's helped secure more than $25 million in public and private funding through her work with the American Archive of Public Broadcasting, University of Tennessee Libraries, Autism TN, the Autistic Voices Oral History Projects, Open Archive, and the Nature Conservancy. Virginia Millington is the program specialist at the American Folklife Center at the Library of Congress. Previously, she served as my supervisor as Managing Director of Program Operations at StoryCorps, the old MLS from the Pratt Institute. Virginia, I'll kick it over to you.
Great, thanks, Patty. Can everyone hear me? Great.
Yeah.
So thanks to IASA, first of all, for inviting us to be part of this wonderful conference. And thanks to the program committee for creating such a timely and important theme for this conference. This panel stemmed from the desire to think through in practical terms how memory workers, oral historians, and archivists might grapple with the real effects of climate change on our work and on the communities that we serve. And document, and the ways and means in which we might approach preserving and making accessible the narratives about the physical world, even as the world around us changes. This panel was directly inspired by a presentation at IASA in 2024, in which Andrea Walker and Susan Mavumbi of the Cape Town University Libraries spoke about the devastating effects of fire on the Jagger Library and the meticulous process of restoring and repairing the audiovisual collections damaged by the water used to vanquish the flames. In the months following the 2024 IASA conference, to cite only a few examples, fire and its deadly ramifications affected lives in Los Angeles and beyond, while flooding far and wide served to inundate communities all across the United States. In this catastrophic world, what could the role of oral history be, and would our traditional tools be effective agents of documentation? What strategies of care and resilience could be enacted in the face of such challenging conditions? This panel brings together practitioners whose lived experience entwines with the stories that they seek to preserve and share. Representing projects and institutions centered in New York, California, and Tennessee, but spanning local, regional, national, and international communities, the panelists represent over half a century of experience as memory workers, spanning decades in which the rate of change within our fields and in the physical landscapes in which we work has accelerated at a dizzying speed. We invite participants and audience members in this panel to not only ask questions, but to view this panel as a contribution to a larger and ongoing conversation in which we might contribute to frameworks of resilience in the face of environmental political ramifications. As ever, the goal is to facilitate the memory of our world despite the tides that beat back against us. So I'm really excited to turn this over to Patty to get us started, and we'll go through a series of presentations. We really hope to have a little bit of time for questions at the end, and feel free to add any questions to the chat as the presentations take place. Thank you.
Thanks, Virginia. This is the one I clicked.
I think.
Or do I just, oh,
Maybe that's-
there we go.
That works.
Which one, enter?
Enter.
Okay, great, have to learn how to advance the slide. So a little bit about where I work, StoryCorps. StoryCorps is an oral history inspired project, and we were started by Dave Isay. Dave is a public radio producer, and his documentaries often framed the storytellers telling their own narrative. So he started StoryCorps in 2003 as a project of his Sound Portraits Productions. As a part of this project, the Library of Congress agreed to be our long-term preservation partner, and our collection is housed not only within our own archive, but at the American Folklife Center, which we have colleagues from here, including Virginia. StoryCorps differs from traditional oral history in that our interviews are generally conversations between two people who know each other, not necessarily an interviewer-interviewee conversation. Participants can discuss anything that they like. While we do have suggested questions and collection initiatives, it's generally pretty open-ended. Project started with the recording booth in Grand Central Terminal, and we have also had several booths, standalone booths through in New York and in different locations. We started, we had a second booth at the World Trade Center, and of course today being 9/11. One of our earliest initiatives was to collect the stories, one story for each person lost during that tragedy. That is an ongoing mission, as unfortunately many lives were lost. We have a booth in Lower Manhattan. We had a booth in San Francisco, Chicago, and Atlanta. Our Lower Manhattan booth is currently the only one that's still in operation, and there are occasionally public appointments available. In 2005, our mobile tour launched. At the time, we had 2 Airstreams traveling across the country simultaneously. You can see a picture of our cute little Airstream there. It is retrofitted to be a recording studio. We've streamlined that to 1 Airstream, going to about 10 cities every year around the country. In 2015, we launched our app that allows anyone, any member of the public, to create an account, record an interview, and upload it to our archive. Those interviews are also stored within the Library of Congress. I forgot to put it on here, but in 2020, of course, we had to switch to virtual recording. So we created a virtual recording platform that I will mention, as it has been actually quite significant as we deal with these issues of climate change. So some of the logistical challenges that we faced as we recorded our interviews. We do, as I mentioned, record in a giant metal box, and while it is well insulated for sound recording, it's not necessarily insulated from the weather. This has been an issue since the beginning, where we often have to turn off the air conditioning or the heating elements for recording if they're interrupting the process. So it was always a consideration when planning the tour, and oftentimes we start and end the tour, which is the winter time in the upper northern states, in the South. Oftentimes Texas or California or Florida, places that are larger infrastructures. This can create something of a bottom heavy collection. So it's also another thing that we really try to focus on counteracting. As we get deeper into this climate transformation, we have had these issues increase. This year, for example, as you can see here, our Tucson, Arizona stop had to be pushed back. It was meant to start at the end of September, and in discussions with the radio station who we partner with, thought if we could push it back a couple of weeks to the beginning of October, it might be a slightly more comfortable environment, though we are still planning on having an alternative recording location, which is good for interview collection, but it also lessens the experience somehow, as that cute little booth you saw is often very much part of people's understanding of storytelling. They really want to record in there. And there have been other disruptions as well. In 2014, there were many flash flood events throughout the states and elsewhere in the world. We were meant to go to Lexington, Kentucky just after a terrible flooding situation. So we really had to assess what we were going to do there. And actually my team, my recording and archives team, were also heading to Lexington to do an on-site training with some new facilitators. So we ended up having to cancel that stop visit and reschedule that training for later in the year. So that also led to some gaps in knowledge for our interview facilitators. They're the ones not only recording our interviews, but also doing the descriptive work. So there was a little bit more hand holding than we necessarily would have done under normal circumstances. There's also been an uptick in just general everyday issues coming up with extreme weather events where interviews are either switched to that virtual platform or having to be rescheduled or canceling. And then we have a quote here from a North Carolina visit from one of our facilitators, that there was a severe hailstorm that started during one of my recordings that was so loud, he had to stop the recording for 10 minutes until it died down. There was also some leaking during that stop. It's already a fun, challenging environment for usually younger people on their first, trip across the country that has really resulted in creating some good problem solvers. So there's also some ethical challenges that I touched on a little bit with the Lexington flooding, is when do we collect these stories? It is part of StoryCorps' ethos to be there for people to be able to record their stories of what they've experienced. For the Lexington stop, there was a lot of discussion as to whether we switched to virtual, or if we went, maybe we could be of service. And in the end, we did end up canceling that stop in the hopes of returning at a later time. It just seemed better to give that community time and space. And we had a similar discussion after the LA fires earlier this year. It ended up, we came to the idea that it wouldn't be the greatest idea for us to, roll up in an Airstream trailer, or even we have smaller recording kits, but people were dealing with more than we needed to be there in the immediate. And we do have the ability to reflect with them at a later time. And that's actually what we ended up doing with Hurricane Katrina here. I think it was a good blueprint that the organization didn't know they were creating at the time. We were able to redirect some crews at the time to record with the diaspora in other areas. And we actually already had a stop in the Gulf area scheduled for just about a month after. And it was a good enough situation and distance that we were able to keep that stop. And then in 2006, we returned to New Orleans to do recordings, and we're able to talk with people. It's obviously still very much an issue, but it had been so devastating even a year later. It was still very fresh, and people were able to reflect on that experience. And I just want to give a plug here. It was obviously just the 20th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina, and we had a really great podcast episode that I was able to work with our podcasting team to comb the archives to pull some really powerful recordings. So I linked it there. I don't know if you all get these slides, but you can also just go to StoryCorps' website. So that's the logistics of recording these conversations during this time of climate transformation, but what kind of stories do we record? We obviously have those Hurricane Katrina stories, which I discussed, but I also wanted to highlight some of these other partnerships and individuals that we recorded with. So we have a bunch of colleges and universities that we recorded with, from environmentalist clubs to more academic discussions, including Northern Illinois, Michigan State, and we had a really great Alaska trip that included University of Alaska at Fairbanks. We've recorded with environmental and conservation societies. And one of my favorites here was the North Country Trail Association. I learned a lot as I was processing those interviews. We have health organizations that talk about the intersection between climate change and health issues, including American Public Health Organization and Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. And we also have a wealth of interviews in our collection where we have, as you can see, using just the tag climate change, 174 conversations that users themselves have uploaded, 250 conversations that StoryCorps facilitators have uploaded. And then we have other tags. Part of our current projects is to make not only our users better taggers, but also our facilitators to keep things a little more consistent. There's lots of ways you can talk about climate change, right? This is certainly not an exhaustive number of tags. And I would have to spend a lot of time in our archive to find all the stories that reflect on this, because we've also had changing words, right? Global warming versus climate change. So that's one of our initiatives, and I think will help us be able to better identify the number and the kind of recordings. And I also just wanted to highlight, we do have a few Hawaii stories. We did, Virginia, maybe you can answer this. I can't remember if we brought the actual Airstream trailer to Hawaii, but we did do a mobile stop in Hawaii in 2011. It's been a while, obviously. We went to 3 different islands, I think. And we do have some user uploaded stories. There's only a handful that relate to this this topic, but I did just want to point out that we have had some of those stories in our archive as well. Now I just want to play you a quick 40-second snippet of this conversation that we did with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation partnership. This is Graham and his father Fred. They have a family farm that Graham and his brother now run, and they're just discussing how they're dealing with the increased rainfall and the issues that they're having getting some of the older farmers to use these newer techniques. I do the slideshow. I never use PowerPoint. Okay, thank you. I just needed to get to this side. So of course, we welcome you to add your story to the StoryCorps archive. Archive.storycorps.org is where our entire digital collection exists, including our StoryCorps recorded interviews and user-generated uploads. We also have our app that you can download on any mobile device. So I will now kick it back to Virginia or whoever's next.
Sure. So thanks, Patty. I'll turn it right over to Casey and Teague. And I think we couldn't on the online people couldn't hear the audio snippet, so maybe we can just share that out later. But thanks, Casey.
We could, I mean, it's short, we could try. We could do screen share.
Let's do this and then maybe at the end. Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here. Yeah, happy to be here virtually, which seems amazing. Go Yaza for pulling this off so well. Pretty seamless. Yeah, excited to share today virtually a project called Earthspeak, very close to myself and Casey's hearts. You will hear more about it. This is our first opportunity to share about the project, which is in the very early stages, although we've been talking about it and ideating it for quite a while. Yeah, first time publicly. So really glad that Yaza has had a focus on climate for this year's conference, and I will just quickly let Casey further introduce herself now.
Hey everyone, very happy to be here virtually with you all today. My name is Casey Davis, and great to see some of my former GBH colleagues in the room there. So I am an archivist and oral historian, and 2 months ago, I actually kind of shifted away, at least in my day-to-day work, from archiving work. I am now doing philanthropy and development at the Nature Conservancy, so a global organization that has chapters in all 50 states and 80 countries worldwide. And what we're doing is working together across the globe to conserve the lands and waters on which we all depend. And so I'm working primarily on our philanthropy team in Tennessee, but still archiving and oral history. I bring the skills day to day to my work, engaging with donors and our funders, and also am deeply engaged in this project that Teague and I are going to be talking about today, EarthSpeak. My past work, I've worked with Human Rights Organization, with Teague, and led the Autistic Voices Oral History Project, as well as the University of Tennessee's Rising from the Ashes, the Chimney Tops 2 Wildfires Oral History Project. Over a decade ago, Karen Cariani, who's in the room with you all today, awakened and alarmed me to the climate crisis, which led me to go home and sit on my couch for like 3 months reading the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's Fifth Assessment Report and like every other scientific research article I could find, which led me to discovering folks like Catherine Hayhoe, who is actually our chief scientist at the Nature Conservancy, and her best practices around climate communication led me to really think about what work we can do as archivists to document the climate crisis, but also in doing that inspire empathy and action. And then I spent a decade working with Karen and Owen and Miranda in the room there with WGBH and the American Archive of Public Broadcasting. But I just wanted to add that I am currently based in the ancestral home of the Yuchi, Shawnee, and Cherokee peoples in present-day Nashville, Tennessee. And I use she or they pronouns. I should have included all of that right when I got started, but a little nervous. So I just kind of info dumped on you all with my background, but I will pass it over to Teague.
Thanks, Casey. You're a fascinating individual, so it's always great to hear about everything that you've been up to and the ways you've been changing the world. Yes, hello everyone. I'm Teague Schneiter. I use she, her pronouns, co-founder of EarthSpeak. I'm speaking to you from the ancestral lands of the Ino, Tutelo, Saponi, and Occaneechi peoples in Durham, North Carolina. I recently survived the Altadena Eaton fire and lost everything, and yeah, my motivation for this project, which we've been talking about for years, actually has gone up because feeling like climate disasters are completely shifting people's lives in these moments, and the time for action is now. So yeah, I'm a moving image archivist, oral historian, and now development professional working in cultural heritage, technology, and human rights. And we can go to the next slide. I'm excited to talk to you today. Also wanted to recognize our talented collaborators who've been supporting this developing initiative, helping with our conceptualization, theory of change, fundraising, online presence, etc. We're really just beginning. We will be able to launch a website in the coming months, so wish it was ready for you now. But Youssef Asabahi, who's an oral history producer and Yemeni filmmaker, Samuel Rubin, who's a climate storyteller and activist, Nicole Martin, who's a media archivist, systems architect, and educator, Virginia Millington, hello, programming archivist, and Elisa Coheen, who's our designer and amazing visual artist. So yeah, these are the folks that have been carrying us so far, and I will turn it over to Katie to talk more about the need for this project before we dive into what it is.
Next slide. Okay, so we want to talk about a few different kind of areas where we see a need for the project that we're going to be sharing with you all, which is Earthspeak. But just kind of going back to my early days of becoming awakened to the climate crisis and sitting on my couch reading all of this scientific literature and trying to come to terms with it, trying to come to terms with it through the lens of my role as an archivist. And I think I mentioned I entered this existential crisis asking myself, what future is our field preserving for? Everything I was reading, if we continued with business as usual with greenhouse gas emissions, that was a really scary future, and one that, it still is a very scary future, and continuing to see the impacts of that today, a decade later. But I actually, as I said, kind of got really interested in the field of climate communication, and I reached out to the Yale Center for Climate Communication, and I heard back from Dr. Anthony Lizarowitz, who's the director there, and I asked him, what should we be doing as archivists? And he wrote back to me that the single most powerful thing your profession can do is document and preserve for future generations this critical moment in the history of our local communities, our states, our nation, and the whole world. And we also want to mention work that has already been done and is continuing through efforts like the Environmental Data and Governance Initiative, which have been engaged in data rescue efforts to capture and preserve scientific research data around the climate crisis. But the human story continues to remain largely missing from the historic record. And there are projects we will highlight later and ways you can gain access to projects that are currently ongoing. But overall, we see that the human story is missing, and especially in this moment in time where all climate-related data is at risk from government erasure, as well as disinformation and misinformation that is perpetuating all of our information spaces. We see this as an important thing for us to be thinking about in terms of documenting collectively.
Great, thanks, Casey. Next slide. So just to expand a little bit more about the need for documenting, preserving, and providing access to the human dimension and impacts of the climate disaster, which is what we're here to talk about. Climate change is no longer an abstract concept, and it's becoming lived experience like it did in my life, and part of people's everyday lives, the fear of, events and just changes and the fallout of actual events. So climate testimonies allow us to document and preserve the emotional and cultural and human dimensions of the crisis, and which, if we do not act for what we're doing, are at risk of being lost, right? So data and reports are critical, as Casey talked about, but they only go so far. And what really builds urgency of action, and this is taken out of the page of the Yale Climate Communications group, is the human voice, the story of a neighbor displaced by flooding, a farmer losing their crops to drought, a community coming together after a wildfire. These personal testimonies of those impacted by the climate crisis have the power to transform our feelings of helplessness into empathy, and empathy into action. And access to these voices, therefore, is critical. So at the same time, climate disasters are becoming more frequent and more severe, and this means communities are constantly needing to recover and rebuild. And in this, the archival community has an opportunity and responsibility, we believe, to step in as kind of second responders. That means preserving the records of destruction and safeguarding the testimonies and cultural memory of those who lived through it. And there are lots of ways that this can be done, and we'll talk about some of the ways that we want to get involved through this project. And then finally, the project, we need it to exist because we need to center and shine a light on those whose stories have not been widely shared with the global community. And Casey and I have been puzzled as to why. Why are we not hearing these stories from communities in the global majority, climate scientists, activists, journalists, policy advocates, and others that are on the front lines of research and action and have been for decades. And those legacies and what they mean for this moment and the future. So as far as we're concerned, if we fail to document these people's experiences now, we risk erasing a critical part of the story of our time. Next slide. So as Casey was indicating, some oral history collections on climate disruption do exist for individual interviews, but they're scattered. They live in different repositories, different formats across different geographies, and there's no unified effort that we know of that makes these testimonies widely accessible or sustainable over the long term. So yeah, part of our motivation has been seeing so many local projects starting up around the world. You know, the fire in Altadena that my family escaped, you know, destroyed 9,400 homes and businesses. It's just like a hard thing to wrap your mind around because basically the whole community is gone, right? With a large impact for Black communities that have lived there for decades and decades. So that project, there's a project with the Altadena Historical Society upper left, and then the project that Casey led, University of Tennessee, for the Chimney Tops wildfire of 2016 is top right. The bottom right, you'll see a small collection from the Science History Museum documenting atmospheric scientists' perspectives, and we highly encourage you to check out the map of environmental climate crisis collections on the Oral History Society website. And I will turn it over to Casey to talk a little bit more about the need.
Yeah, so what we're talking about here is a resource that we see as critical to the global climate movement, to researchers, and to our current societies and future societies. So imagine this free online collection or access point to many different collections of first-person climate-related stories available for anyone to access, to use, to provide advocates with powerful lived narratives that they can use to illustrate the urgency of the crisis. Our goal is to encourage organizations that we're working with to document these testimonies via open licenses, to make them open and reusable, allowing for climate movement leaders, educators, journalists, community organizers to be able to draw from this archive to tell the story of how people understood or understand and are responding to the climate crisis. So our goal is more than just documenting the climate crisis, but to contribute to shifting perspectives and to help all of humankind continue to recognize what is truly at stake.
So what are we actually planning to do? We'll get into a little more, but our goal is to collect, preserve, and make accessible and support the use of video recorded stories of humans' experience with the global climate crisis. So we seek to enable secure and unified preservation and access of climate testimonies that have been and will be produced globally. So these first-person narratives that will fill in the gap of climate archives at risk of erasure, talking about data loss and mis and disinformation. And beyond the digital archive, we seek to become the first of its kind of network for those producing or seeking to produce climate oral histories, so that we can build a movement across stories of impact and encourage the diversity of viewpoints added to the historical record. So what this means is not only setting up this sort of repository, but also coordinating a network of practitioners doing this work. So hats off to the Oral History Society and the folks, you know, the website that they put together to kind of collectivize that. But what we see is the kind of role for these current practitioners to train both individuals and organizations to record more stories with technologists, authors, public health experts, those working in biodiversity, migration, energy, you know, activists, climate refugees, those experiencing drastic changes, Indigenous peoples, historically marginalized folks, folks that are living close to the land, etc. So you get the idea. Yeah, it will go into kind of like our core values, mission and vision, and like the nuts and bolts. But yeah, just to kind of say, we're currently operating without dedicated funding, but we're hoping to launch our website later this year as a foundational step, and hoping to secure some at least research and development funding by 2026. Casey?
Yeah, so we want to talk a little bit about what we are the core values that are kind of guiding our work in developing this initiative. First off, centering the voices of impacted communities and individuals, especially those that experience systemic oppression. We want to focus on equitable resource distribution, so paying people for their time and for sharing their stories and for collecting these oral histories. We're thinking about sustainable practices in terms of, for example, participating in this conference remotely. We all wish we were there with you in Hawaii, but also thinking about other practices in our preservation methods that are more sustainable, such as emerging practices in decentralized archiving and preservation, which we could talk a little bit more about that with you if that is a new concept for you. Thinking as well about human connection through authentic storytelling, so really focusing on connecting people and communities through people sharing their stories and allowing them to share them in their own way, and just facilitating folks being able to document their experiences. And then harm reduction and not contributing to extractive colonialist practices. So this repository we're talking about is one that centers the communities that are actually documenting these stories. We want to provide kind of a centralized access portal to the stories that are being collected across the world, and being able to connect them through the network, but not, take those stories from those communities, those stories continuing to live with the communities that created them and where they originated. And then a collective approach to building climate testimony movement. We know, everyone has a climate experience, whether that be folks who are already doing oral histories around climate change, folks like Teague and maybe others in the room who have experienced climate impacts, folks who, outside of your work as an archivist are participating in the climate movement. So we want this to be a collective approach.
Our next slide is about our mission and vision. You've heard about this. One new concept I'll bring up, or talk about a little bit more, is the need for this preservation repository to be secure and possibly decentralized. So for those that are not familiar, decentralized preservation is an approach to storing and maintaining digital data where encrypted files are distributed across a global peer-to-peer network of independent nodes, rather than being housed in a single location by a single provider. So it does give us the ability to prevent erasure of data. And yeah, something I can put in the chat, like sort of the DWeb principles, so that you can read more about it if you're not familiar. But that's something we want to focus our first research and development grant on pursuing. And then sort of like a centralized access portal will be a separate but linked initiative, so that we can provide access to these testimonies. Next slide. I don't think we need to go a ton into this because I feel like we've kind of covered it, but if there's anything we want to say about the network creation, I can cover that. So yeah, we're envisioning this annual practitioner and community convening, so possibly an online remote conference, and kind of out of that being able to develop a network-led training program that will equip sort of a widening group of climate oral history practitioners. So one of the examples of how that could be utilized is, a lot of times public libraries are the kind of first responders after a disaster, and folks are going to them saying, I have a story I want to tell, or I want to start an oral history program, or things like that. So being able to kind of leverage the network to get training into those locations at those times, so that not only things are being done in an informed way, so we both have a lot of oral history experience, and everyone in the network would, but that they would be hopefully deposited into the centralized or decentralized preservation system and centralized access portal. And then in the future, we're not looking at recording our own testimonies right now, but that would be something we'd want to fundraise in the future. We want to offer multilingual indexing, so folks could have access to these testimonies all over the world, and kind of not dependent on whatever language that they speak. And then, paid fellowship opportunities to do research, maybe even like artist residencies, that kind of thing. So it could grow. The last slide is Elisa Coheen, who's the designer building our website, what they say about us. Next slide. We thought was interesting. So EarthSpeak stands apart as a comprehensive and ethically minded archive positioned at the intersection of preservation and action. The initiative is designed for long-term sustainability and real community use. Few efforts combine rigorous archival practice with accessible, action-oriented storytelling and meaningful community participation. This is the gap EarthSpeak addresses. So thank you, Elisa, for saying that about this initiative. And we hope that that does come across. We're excited to share our website with folks once it's live. We are currently looking for partners, collaborators, funders, and soon focus group participants. So if you're at all interested, please contact us via one of our email addresses. Next slide. Thank you. And yeah, if you have any questions for us, we'd be happy to answer them at the end. Thanks for listening.
Great, thanks, Teague and Casey. And without further ado, we'll hand it over to Acacia.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. I'm happy to be here. I know we are getting close to time, so I'm going to get on with it. Again, I'm Acacia Thompson. I'm the Environmental Justice Coordinator and a librarian at the Greenpoint Library and Environmental Education Center for Brooklyn Public Library in Brooklyn, New York. And I am currently on the ancestral land of the Lenape people. I live, work, and am an activist in the neighborhood of Greenpoint, Brooklyn. And I'm going to talk about a specific project I worked on here. So a slide, Patty. Before I was in this current role, I was the outreach archivist on the Greenpoint Environmental History Project, a digital archive to document the environmental history of Greenpoint through the oral histories and digitized items. And this archive tells the story of how industries harmed the ecology and the health of this area and its people, but as well as the activism that followed the fight and to the atrocities happening in a close-knit community and its history of now one of the most quickly developing and gentrifying neighborhoods in New York City. Though Greenpoint experiences climate issues like flooding and waterfront resiliency and heat island effect, creating soaring urban temperatures, these oral histories mainly focus on people-made environmental issues felt here. This project was under the umbrella of our library's Brooklyn Oral History Project, Our Streets, Our Stories, an archive that preserves the many lived experiences of Brooklynites. For the purpose of this talk, I'll focus on the oral history component of the archive, and you may peruse the digitized ephemera and photographs and documents on the website. So when I was hired for this position, I was already an active community member working on environmental issues in my community. But I was not an experienced oral historian, but had archival training and a connection to the subject I was going to preserve. Next slide. So to understand the project, I want to give you some quick background of the story and the community I interviewed to preserve the memory of what has happened here. So the neighborhood of Greenpoint is in the northwest section of Brooklyn. It's the bottom of the screen there. It's bordered by the East River estuary and the Newtown Creek, its tributary. And that geography is important as it shows how Greenpoint's access to the waterways sealed it as an area for commerce and industry. Next slide. So here you can see a little bit better on this tiny map where Greenpoint lies just adjacent to the boroughs of Manhattan and Queens. And this waterway, the Newtown Creek, has a rich history of industrialized pollution. Next slide. So in the 19th century, it was home to the 5 black arts. That's oil refining, printing, cast iron manufacturing, and glass and pottery making. And these industries, along with chemical manufacturing, glue production, fat rendering, and tanning plants, created an ecological disaster by polluting the waterways, the aquifer, the air quality, and the soil. Next slide. So this waterway became a major shipping hub. And with all the industrial and shipping activity, the creek as a biodiverse habitat and a freshwater source was destroyed. And there were no laws in place to hold industries accountable for their practices. Next slide. So these refineries, of which there were dozens, besides their topside tanks that you see here, also had underground tanks, which leaked for over 100 years, creating the third largest oil spill in American history to date, underneath my community where I live. The creek would be designated as a federal Superfund site in 2010, holding ExxonMobil responsible, who are the company that's the current leaseholders of the tanks. And this date is extremely disappointing, as the federal government first acknowledged the issue in 1979. Next slide. But look, the politicians come to announce it many, many years later, including our New York City mayoral candidate, Andrew Cuomo, who was the state attorney general at the time. And if you're not familiar, a Superfund site is a location deemed so contaminated with hazardous materials that the Environmental Protection Agency steps in to identify responsible parties and tries to enforce payment to clean it up. On the left, you can see the extent of the Greenpoint oil spill and its remediation area. In our neighborhood, we have 3 Superfund sites, and that's really bad. Next slide. Now, what did this all do to the people that live there and do now? So Greenpoint is historically an immigrant neighborhood, like many of our communities here. And for the last 100 years, it has been one of the largest Polish communities in this country, along with a substantial Puerto Rican and Dominican population. And these people, they knew their neighborhood was polluted, but had little agency to do anything about it until the Clean Air and Clean Water Acts in the 1970s. Once they had legal authority, they started holding industry and elected officials accountable for what was happening in Greenpoint. The people of Greenpoint have seen how these environmental issues have affected the health of their families and their neighbors. And in the oral histories, you hear about that. And they started fighting. Next slide, please. So over time, Greenpoint has become a strong activist community coming together to fight the people who made these environmental issues, like sanitation incinerators that were causing burning garbage, creating cancer-causing dioxins, waste transfer stations that were creating putrescent open-air dumps next to residential neighborhoods, proposed waterfront power plants spewing harmful pollutants, the oil spill, dangerous manufacturing practices, just to name a few. Next slide. And Brooklyn Public Library and community stakeholders believed it was important to document what had happened here and preserve this community's memory. Most of the oral history interviews I did had residents recalling memories starting around the 1970s, though some long-term residents spoke about growing up there as early as the 1940s and the issues that they experienced then. Next slide, please. So this was a grant-funded part-time position, as many of us have probably experienced. So with a deadline, I set a goal of how many oral histories I wanted to obtain. And to find subjects to interview, I did a fair amount of outreach through the libraries, schools, and PTA meetings with our elected officials. I spoke at community board meetings, houses of worship, visited senior centers, and spoke at other local meetings to make sure people knew about this opportunity to do an oral history on their experience of the environment in this community. I already had a lot of connections here, so I started there doing oral histories with activists that I knew. Next slide. So those interviews were a rabbit hole, as each interview led me to different people. My interviewees would tell me about other community members they thought I should talk to, and they put me in contact with them or I tracked them down. And this was important, as I needed to make sure the community was well represented and not just through people I knew. And as the interviews progressed, the story of the neighborhood and the scope of the environmental crisis really started to unfold to me. And I started seeing the different themes in the narrative of the community. As I did the oral histories, I became better at interviewing. And in the end, I did 62 oral histories, including over 110 people. And I will say the biggest hurdle to the oral histories, besides the time constraints, was my ability to obtain interviews within the Polish and Spanish-speaking communities. My ability to speak French did not help me in any way with this endeavor, and to gain trust and access to the groups of people where I lacked connection. And that was my learning lesson, that I needed to put in more time and build trust before I could ask people to tell me their story. And that is something that I continue to work on in Greenpoint, as there are many stories and viewpoints to preserve. And I know we have the potential to add to this project with more diverse and representative oral histories. To add access points of discovery, we to the archive. We've also had all of them transcribed, making them available in hard copy at our library and word searchable in our catalog. Next slide, please. So in our case, in Greenpoint, so many of the little stories that add to the narrative of what happened here and the fight that people continually fight would be eventually lost if those memories were not recorded. And it's important that they are, not only for community history's sake, but because this kind of environmental injustice will continue to happen, and people can learn and find strength in those stories of the people in these oral histories. They can inspire and aid in affording change to help protect the environment and to safeguard the health of the community. Next slide. So I hope this has piqued your interest in how a hyper-local oral history may preserve how environmental issues affect communities and what the people who live there do to protect their families, neighbors, and the land they live upon. I want to say that the library is a really unique, trusted civic resource, which is a natural place for oral history, sort of like what Teague said earlier. And I feel very lucky that I get to be a caretaker of those stories. So please reach out to me if you have any questions. Next slide. And here's just another link to the oral histories and the full project. But again, I'm excited to be here with you all and to learn about Teague and Casey's project and ongoing with StoryCorps. I think there's a lot of connections here. So thank you so much, everyone.
Great. Thank you, Acacia. So I think for the 5 or 6 minutes we have left, I will monitor the chat if there's any questions, and Patty can take in-person questions. But thanks so much for joining us, and thanks to the presenters for some great presentations.
Thanks, Virginia. Any questions?
Do we want to rerun the video with audio for people online or no?
I think we could do that if there's no immediate questions.
I'd like to ask a question of all the participants. So I'm wondering about, we're talking about capturing the stories of people in areas where their homes are being destroyed, that they're precarious. And one way you might approach the attempt to get oral histories is to ask them about the conditions under which this precarity occurred. Another thing you might be wanting to do is preserve their histories before they got into such a bad position. And I wonder if you thought about that distinction and which of the two you're trying to get, because they seem to answer to different needs. One is to preserve stories of the community before everything goes badly, and one is to preserve the story of it going badly and what's happening under those conditions. And I was wondering how you're thinking about those two kinds of stories.
I'd like to answer first. Great question, Owen. Hi. Yeah, I think the way that I've always done oral history, and this is not the way to do it in every case, but is to start from first childhood memory. So, and you can actually do like a life history type oral history in a shorter time period. I've had people do it, tell their whole life story in an hour and a half. But typically, lengthier time allotments are needed. And so when I'm talking about like testimonies or oral histories, I'm talking about of the person for their whole life and experience. And it's very kind of interviewee or narrator directed in terms of what they want to talk about. And, after experiencing anything, including a climate disaster, they'll have certain things that will weigh more on their memory that, may connect to current experiences, and that's just how it works. So, but I think that all happens like naturally. And so, yeah, I think when I'm talking about oral histories, I'm talking about not just from the crisis onwards, but kind of the whole life and whole picture of that individual and whatever they consider their community and individuals that impacted them, any kind of experiences that they want to share. So yeah. That's my view, but I let other people answer.
I can speak to that just specifically on sort of the people-made environmental issues that we have here. When I got into this position, I am involved in a lot of current fights that are going on within the community, and it's been a really wonderful opportunity to get oral histories while they're in the middle of the fight, because most of the oral histories that I have are, after the fights that people have gone through. And so now currently we've got several things going on with frac pipelines, rampant development. We have a specific road that has been a contentious issue, an environmental issue that I'm getting oral histories from people at the time while they're doing it. And then we'll do it. Then we'll do more oral histories after those fights, sort of come to a completion. So I think about that in a similar way.
I'll just say it's a little harder for StoryCorps because it's still not as structured, but we do visit cities, though we try to keep things diverse over again. So I think there's definitely a chance for outreach. If you've visited somewhere before, that if something happens, then we could reach out to maybe some of those participants to talk about if they're interested. We have your story from before this happened. Do you want to come and talk to us about what life is like now?
And that's what we did with the Rising from the Ashes, Chimney Tops 2 Wildfires Oral History Project. Like in the 3 days following the fire, the local public library captured about 40 audio interviews with community members. And then the project I led at University of Tennessee, we came in about 3 to 4 years after and re-interviewed a lot of those people, but then also engaged folks who came from the Red Cross, who came from other volunteer response organizations. We interviewed scientists who had been studying the impacts of the fire, impacts of the fires. We interviewed journalists. So we were able to cast a broader net to different constituencies, and then also re-interview a lot of the community members, but then interview for the first time folks from the Honduran community who were not interviewed in the first round, and be able to get more stories that way.
And we're just about at time. Were there any quick question? Or we could quickly play this 40-second clip for the online.
Never thought in Nebraska, in the middle of the country, that we would be filling up with water. It's not just economically that it's hard to recover, but the psychological impact of seeing that kind of destruction is tough. I think it would do a lot of things for a lot of people's mental health if we start to prioritize the more biodiverse systems. There's still some hesitancy in some pockets to say the words climate change,
especially the older people, but it's slowly coming around.
What my hopes are is that us as farmers are going to react as a whole to climate change. Regenerative farming starts with restoring and regenerating the land.
Thanks, everyone.
Hey, thanks everyone for coming.
Bye, Virginia.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, Teague.
Bye, Teague. Bye, Casey.
Bye, Acacia.
Bye, have fun, everybody.
Have fun. Thanks for all your help.
That's right.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It seems to look pretty wrong.
Yeah, I'm happy to stand there. I do have a brief intro for Louise. Hi, Louise, can you hear us okay?
Hi, Trey. How are you? Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, yeah, sounds
Great.
good, looks good. Yep, wonderful.
I just
I'm going
want
to.
I
Go
just
ahead.
want to try and share a slide share so I can
Yeah,
see.
yeah, we can do it from your side. That's no problem. That's no problem.
So I can just see how it's gonna go.
Okay.
And just whether I can share from Google or what is going to be my best bet.
Yeah. Slideshow.
So how does that work for you?
Looks good. Looks good. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yep.
if I want to, because one of the challenges being on the Zoom is that, of course, for most people, they won't toggle between the speaker and the slides. So then the speaker's really small.
That's
So
true. Yeah.
for some of mine, I may turn my slides off,
Okay.
so that I'm bigger.
That's
I may
fine.
just
I think
stop my
that
share
works.
so I
Yeah,
can
sure.
actually talk to you.
That sounds great.
And yeah, because otherwise it's a little bit tiny.
Yeah, I hear you. In the
Yeah.
room, I have to say it looks pretty good. We have a really nice big screen, so yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And I've been farting about with my background. It looks okay to me. Can you see me clearly? Have I
Oh,
got too
yes.
much interference from all my objects in my room?
No,
Do
it's a
have
very
a
good
lot of
picture.
stuff.
It's a very good
Okay.
picture. Yeah.
Okay. All right,
right.
great.
So I'm going to just quickly introduce Louise Curham, who has worked with government information collections and archives in the public sector and the community collections sector. Until recently, Louise was involved in archives in higher education. Her PhD investigated archives that don't digitize effectively. Which is research she continues. So Louise, please take it away.
Okay. Well, hi everyone. Everyone who's dialed in remotely has said how much they would really like to be there with you in Hawaii. I originally come from New Zealand, from Aotearoa, New Zealand, and I'm joining you here from Ngambri Ngunnawal country in Canberra. Some of you know Ray Edmondson, who's been a leading light in Sapava and audiovisual. Ray's someone we all have deep respect for. Well, Ray's about 1 kilometre away from my house. We're here in Canberra, obviously the hub of AV practice in Australia. So, yeah, as I said, I'm joining you from Ngunnawal Ngambri country, and of course, practices here go back at least 21,000 years. That is a lot of sets of grandparents. And as I get into my talk, you'll see that living in Australia, living in my part of the world, this kind of interface between the settler experience and the First Peoples reality is a kind of constant feature, especially for those of us who work in the GLAM sector, in the galleries, libraries, archives, and museums. Like many people in our sector, I began life in creative practice. I think that's a feature of our sector that doesn't get enough airtime. So if you take anything from my talk, please note, I've been teaching in higher education for the last 5 years in library and information studies, information science, in the archives and records courses, and I'm really blown away by the number of students who have graduated their creative arts degree and need to get a job. And they're very attracted to us. They want to join us. I was that person back in 2000, needing a job. Stumbled my way into the field of archives. In Australia, the archives community is quite famous for giving speeches that say things like, no 5-year-old said, hey, I'm going to be an archivist when I grow up. Something we should probably all be working on changing. But I found my way here. I trained in film. So I gravitated while I started working as a volunteer with colonial collections. I found my way to audiovisual preservation pretty quickly. I stayed there for a couple of years, actually about 7. But in Australia, that field is very small. It's grown over time. So that's another reality I'd really love you all to take away, is that we look to the States in particular, and I realize quite a lot of the delegates in this conference are from the States, which is not surprising given we're in Hawaii. And we look at, the kind of resourcing and the sheer number of employment opportunities is really quite different from my part of the world. So for students to kind of take a master's degree specializing in audiovisual is it's not really a thing. So that crossover between audiovisual practice and being an archivist is another thing that really interests me. And my presentation to Sapava last year in Solo was talking about that very kind of topic. So now I'm going to get into the presentation I planned for you. So this is about something that's very dear to my heart, which is stuff that doesn't digitize effectively. So most of us spend our time working with collections that can get represented one way or another through digital means, through recorded means. And I've become really interested in knowledges in cultural objects that don't really, where the digital representation or the recorded representation sort of misses the point. And the particular area that my research has focused on, this was the topic of my PhD, but more importantly, it's been part of my creative practice since about 2003. And it deals with this area of expanded cinema. So this book, Jonathan Wally, an Ohio-based scholar, Denison University, has written the mighty tome on expanded cinema in the year 2000. That updates a really quite famous book from the 70s titled Expanded Cinema, written by Gene Youngblood. So, obviously I'm in creative arts, so I've gravitated towards this particular case study of this art practice that involved using moving image technology and performance to create experiences. And it grew out of a particular moment in the 70s where getting together in person, where seizing the means of production, where talking back to broadcast media were really kind of pressing points of engagement. It was also a moment in the 70s where moving image technology, particularly 16mm, became accessible to artists. So most of the work that I've been really involved in around expanded cinema comes from the London Filmmakers Co-op, which was really one of the world's most successful artist-run initiatives, formed in the late 60s in London, which at that time was still a kind of certainly not the gentrified place of the late 80s and 90s that we've come to think of London as being, where, central city real estate was usable and accessible to artists because it was still in a rundown, deteriorated state. And a bunch of artists got together and got their hands on 16mm. And one of the key artists involved in that was Malcolm LeGrice. So Malcolm died just recently. And Malcolm's energy was deeply infectious, and he was a writer as well as a maker. And that's also, there was a lot of talking amongst those artists. There was a lot of thinking about what it meant to investigate this politics of image production in this way and to bring together performance and moving image technology. So the histories of expanded cinema, so a really classic work. Now I'm going to click over to my slide so I can illustrate for you what I'm actually talking about. So that's me. I'm currently got a contract with the University of Wollongong, so I'm staying connected to higher education, but I'm freed from the constraints of the very high teaching loads that are the reality of contemporary higher ed. The problem I'm talking about is this unique preservation challenge that comes about with these works. Really, the point of the work is the live experience. And what that means for us as preservation experts, as collection carers, is that we need to maintain the means to continue those performances if we want those works to stay with us. So one of the most well-known of these works amongst the contemporary community is Anthony McCall's line describing a cone, and you'll see that there on the bottom section of the screen. What this work involves is literally a line, an animated line, forming a circle over 30 minutes. In the room is a small amount of haze. Originally, it was cigarette smoke. And what happens is a kind of phenomenon, like an eclipse, where the cone starts to get described over the course of the event. And my colleague and I will restage this work here in Canberra next week. We've staged it a few times. There's some interesting politics around accessing that work. One of the features of these expanded cinema works is that they have the potential of being highly accessible. So the thing I want you to take from this is that what happens with line describing a cone is that the audience doesn't sit. The audience is in the room as the cone emerges, and the audience is part of the experience as the work unfolds. And they interact with that. It's such an extraordinary kind of phenomenon that you can't help but want to put your hands, put your body in the light, in the cone. So it's a very dynamic, interactive experience that takes place over 30 minutes. And that's got lots of the ingredients that make up expanded cinema, that it involves the space in which it takes place. It involves the technology of the moving image generating equipment. It involves the audience in a really integral way. Other examples I've got here. So here you're seeing Film Action, which was some of the early London filmmakers co-op people with one of their first projection events in London. Castle One, which is a Malcolm LeGrice work that is an interplay between a live light bulb and a filmed light bulb, and it's all about the flash. It's a very kind of Brechtian 1966, really early piece of these works. And some other works here that my colleague Lucas and I have been involved in through reenactment. So what's the method that my colleague Lucas and I have developed? Okay, so I seem to have dropped out. Am I still there?
Back, yeah.
Back now.
Yeah, sorry. Don't know what's going on there. So I can see that my narrative has a gap, which is before we get to the manual making, what Lucas and I have been involved in is actually restaging these works. So we've got our hands dirty with actually with putting them on. We've done that through a process of trial and error. We've evolved a practice that involves communicating with the artist, bringing together the resources in the studio, so spending time with the artist, learning about the work, then restaging the work ourselves. And in that restaging process, we do a quite sort of mindful note-taking and record-keeping process. And we use that note-taking and record-keeping process to produce these manuals. So they end up looking, one of the first manuals we made, which you're seeing here on the bottom, on the colored one on the downward side there, it looks like a kind of school holiday project instruction for kids. And a friend of mine said to me, well, this is great. This looks really interesting, but I know it's not going to be as easy as you make it sound. Just like those, DIY woodwork books, etc., etc. So that was a really fair comment. So I have then spent time as a researcher testing these manuals to see, okay, do they actually work? Can the work get transmitted through this set of instructions that we've created? It's an interesting process because it's not a matter of kind of asking permission from these artists. What we've done is build a relationship with them and gone through this process of inquiry. So it's quite it has an interesting rights dimension, which we've been really investigating in our recent work with Malcolm LeGrice and Malcolm's son, Oliver, who has become the custodian of Malcolm's art after Malcolm's passing. But that relationship with the artist is part of our process. Then there's a note-taking process. which then gets set down in this set of instructions. And we've tried a range of different approaches to making those instructions. And you'd be right to say, well, isn't that, your kind of recording zone? And the answer to that is yes, it is. So we're back into the domain that we as GLAM professionals understand, making some kind of recording of this creature that we want to keep. But there's some quite specific qualities to these recordings. One of them is that we're trying to tell this story very specifically from our own experience. We are trying to behave as kind of expert users. We're not looking to change or develop or evolve the work, although each piece does run into challenges that require us to evolve and think about how this work is going to need to adapt and change over time. So understanding things, for example, what is the impact of moving from 16mm to video, for example, in different works? What are the consequences? How important is that? And so far we've got, it depends on the work. And it's an interesting question how that's going to evolve as time goes on. The manual testing. So from 2016, we've been doing this for 3 of the manuals that we've produced. One of them is for a contemporary work by a British artist, Lynn Liu. The other 2 manuals are for works from the 70s, one of Malcolm's works, Horror Film 1, and one of Guy Sherwin's works, who's another London Filmmakers Co-op, Man with Mirror, which we've termed Woman with Mirror. So this still here is showing you Lucas rehearsing our work with Horror Film 1. So we've had a really interesting couple of years with Horror Film 1 because there's a lot of interest in that work. It's considered a real landmark piece of expanded cinema. That work involves a walk from a projection surface back towards 3 projectors. And as the performer walks backwards, the shadows move and interface with color. It's very, very simple, but it creates a very poetic and complex image from this extremely simple set of procedures. In this shot, you're seeing myself, Lucas, Malcolm LeGrice, his son Oliver, an Italian artist, Cinzia Nistico, who was wanting to learn how to who wanted to use our instructions for a performance of Horror Film 1, which she's then gone on to perform all around Europe in a bunch of different festivals and events. And that's worked really successfully. So the same with Man with Mirror, Guy Sherwin's work. This one is of particular relevance to you because the AV components of Man with Mirror originated on Super 8. The Eye Film Museum has made 16mm preservation materials from that Super 8. But this work requires the person who is in the film to be the performer. Guy is now in his late 70s, so the relevance of preserving his film is a really interesting question. Of course, it has historic value. It is the original materials of Guy's, Guy's Super 8 is there in iFilm along with these 16mm components. But the point of that work, Man with Mirror, is the interface between Guy in the film and Guy in the flesh. So the relevance of those preserved film components is a really moot point. Our instructions allow another artist to completely remake that work and perform it so that they can appear in the film and also, of course, be the performer. So it's a really kind of interesting one. Who should have this role? Like who should do this work of making these tools? That of course, this is not the only. There are many other preservationists have looked at this challenge. Well, not many, but there's certainly in the field of conservation, people are thinking about this challenge of live performance. And of course, John Ippolito and colleagues worked on this back in the early 2000s, thinking about variable media as a whole. Their early method involved a questionnaire to learn from the artists or creators of these works that involved media components in some kind of performance paradigm, to interview those artists, and in order to gain insight into what was important to the artists about those works in order to make them live for the long term. Pip Lawrenson has an article from 2006 about change in media art and the challenges of whether we accept or we seek to lock in place. To what degree do we accept change in our artworks? To what degree are we happy to update our media? What's the impact of that update? So Pip has continued working on those ideas throughout her career and now is teaching in the conservation area at UCL in London. Renee van der Waal, and I've put an E on Renee's surname, which is incorrect. My apologies to those of you who know Renee van der Waal. In 2011, she led a research team looking specifically at works that were intended to change. How should they be cared for? She advocated this idea of the biographical approach. So thinking about each artwork as having a biography, as having a story. And through capturing that story, you then give the conservation team the opportunity to draw on all the different tropes of that story, the different permutations the artwork's gone through, in order to decide what remains an authentic representation of that artwork. Now, some of you will be thinking, hey, how on earth does this relate to my particular challenges? This sounds very kind of art history, fine art related. But these ideas around these living works is increasingly part of all of our experience as we really try to grapple with what remains crucial from this piece of work. And as we think about things like our carbon footprint, how heavy do we need to be in our preservation actions? How relevant is it for us to invest really deep resources into every single component of the works that we care for? So another more recent project is choreography in the museum. So this involves a group from Australia and from the Tate, who've been investigating, again, these works that need to perform. And Louise Lawson is doing some really interesting work looking at things like preserving friendship networks. So how to capture something of the friendship networks, which is often a crucial part of the way performance art gets made. So this starts to become really kind of philosophical in its thrust. I also wanted to draw your attention to something I came across while I was preparing for this talk. I have a quite out of sort of 3-month late subscription to the art newspaper. This really interested me to see this discussion of the language of art as having a life force of its own, of the object having a life force of its own. For those of you who come, for many of us in the room, will recognize this language around the taonga, the treasures, the life force of the treasures that we care for, particularly connected to First Nations cultures. So I'm always careful not to draw a direct link between my work and those knowledges, because I'm coming at this from a very Eurocentric Western perspective. But I'm certainly highly conscious of that adjacency of this kind of idea of, and I kind of think of our work with these manuals and with this investigation of this live art as a way of kind of training people like me, white, Eurocentric, glam professionals, to really start thinking in a very deep way about what it is people mean, First Nations people mean when they say the spirit of this work lives in this digital object, for example. What does that really mean? So this kind of life force of these objects is really important. So in summary, our research shows that manuals work. You need, in order to go down this route of exploring this idea of manuals, what you need is goodwill from the people who have made the original thing that you're seeking to manualize. You need a feedback mechanism, so you need a way to capture the stories of use. So this is one dimension to this practice that I have brushed over, which is that in testing the manuals, you add new knowledge to how the work can be staged. So this draws on that biographical approach that René van der Waal was talking about. Having a mechanism to actually capture that experience from users is a really important thing. In short, the process is one of patient record keeping whilst creating or using this work. The point of view of the storyteller is important. So Lucas and I feel that we are connected to that practice. We feel we're part of that tradition of the London Filmmakers Co-op. So we feel like we have we are appropriate to be doing this manualization. And the ongoing use of the manuals is really crucial. So to keep these works alive, that use is what is needed. So another factor here that's really important is attractiveness, is making it so the manuals are usable. And one of the key features of that has been this letter, a letter from the original creator talking directly to future users. So sorry, I really should not be bringing this up in the last moments of this talk, but really my purpose here is to give you a taste of this work, to pique your curiosity and to alert you to this methodology. So what happens in this process is that this practice of use acts as a growth ring, wrapping around the work and strengthening, helping it grow stronger and retain its strength through time. So that concludes what I wanted to share with you. You can click through these slides, I'm sure end up shared. I haven't quite worked out how within shared. If you want to see the reference list, there's your QR code that will take you through to this set of resources. In there, you'll see the links through to the Variable Media Questionnaire, to Pip Lawrenson's article, to some of the work from Louise Lawson and colleagues, to that original research project from René van der Waal. So those may be resources you will want to refer to. So more info, if you want to learn more about this, get in touch with me. It's a methodology that I really feel passionate about. Okay, I'll stop. So Trey, over to you.
Yeah, Louise, would you mind sharing the QR code one more time? I think somebody in the room wants to take a picture.
Yeah, sure.
If you have to get
Absolutely.
some resources.
Yeah, just 1 second. I just have to find my way to it. I've got lots of different things open here. Okay. There we
go.
Can you see that okay?
Yep, that's perfect.
Okay, awesome.
All right. I think we have time for one question. We are at time, and I want to keep us on schedule for local. The lunch happens right after this. Does anybody have an initial question or?
Okay, let's check in the chat. Okay. No, those are from the previous one. Okay, no worries. Yeah. Okay, so follow me up if you want to by email.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing I'm really interested in is expanded cinema that language is well understood in the UK, the US, Japan, Australia. That language is not necessarily the way these works get described in other parts of the world. Artists using technology is definitely a thing everywhere in the 60s and 70s. Really keen to hear about that.
Wonderful. I think probably in the interest of time, Louise, put your email address in the chat. That way people can have access to it. And then we can figure out how to share that out otherwise. And I do think through your bio, people can contact you. So thank you very much. We're going to switch over to Gisa, who's joining us from Shanghai. Really quick introduction. I know Gisa's not one for big introductions, but a bit of a legend in the Yasa community for sure. So yeah, Professor Dr. Gisa Jaehnichen is currently associated with the Shanghai Conservatory of Music and is engaged with ethnomusicology, ethnomusicological fieldwork and AV archiving in Southeast Asia and has been for many decades. She's taught at various universities and her writing and publications are widespread all over the world and openly accessible. Gisa, I'll turn it over to you, and either we can share your slides or bring it up on our computer, however you prefer.
I hope you can see that and you can hear me also. Can you?
Yes, to both, yes.
Good. So,
Perfect.
also it is widely known for sure. First, I have to thank everyone that I can be there. And I'm very thankful that the room is more full now. Awaiting something else, I'm not sure. Also, it is widely known for sure that places will be lost. There are movements underway which oppose strongly. Not all of them are useful for navigating AV archival work. The loss of place for cultures results possibly from the insight that any culture never existed out of itself, but a mixture of all kinds of input. If the past and traditions and identities are at stake, there is often purposely an extremely narrow piece of the last 100 to 150 years praised of being the right thing. Now we may know better. Cultures, if seen from this perspective, are therefore heavily individualized and do not fit strict borders of any nation or region. One of those movements recreating spatial belongings is ethnomusicology, in accordance with the revealing ecomusicology. I hope everyone knows these terms. Archivists may not want to deal with the ecological barrier in humanities and social sciences. This short paper is about this concept brought up by a number of experienced workers in that field. Also, the necessity of place-based AV archives might be under discussion, which can lead to organizational consequences. Does it really play a role where things happen? Seemingly, it does not play a role anymore, which is a result of the previous technical changes such as regular airplanes, easy land travel, and comfortable settling elsewhere. The place where all comes together is the internet and its platforms, where people become members of their chosen community. Or they are chosen. That is not a difference to previous habits. Which person was ever asked to stay in a community? I see that this picture is here covering this. Should not be the way. Does it really play a role from where someone is coming? This question is hard to answer as an ethnography. It may play a role. National belongings are even used as personality determination. We see that I just uncovered this sign from where I am. And it is said that I have to put it because actually everyone should know. Or it doesn't play a role from where I am. language knowledge included. That is said, but not to change quickly. Only examples can help to break through this barrier. If a nationality or minority is not defining the character anymore and people will have lost interest in asking for that, this might be a sign of overcoming. The third question is there an indicator of cultural background and contemporaneity? The same applies to this question. If personality designation is a thing, the respective people will not develop the entire spectrum of knowledge one could get. Culture is not inherited like genes. It does only impact the environment, the way of upbringing, the things people learn on the way when becoming a grown-up person. The self-chosen community is often part of this upbringing. The language becomes seemingly more important as they indicate familiarity with physical presence in some social environments. How do AV archives respond to obvious changes? In an index journal was written in 2017, which is not yet long ago. The social sciences are one means through which researchers and practitioners can come to understand the human dimensions of conservation and natural resource management. AV archives are in large parts dependent on this natural resource management. In other words, AV archives need to change their perspective as storage for unusable things in the audiovisual domain towards a sustainability that goes beyond storage functions. That will need people. Here we are. The connection of evening music. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
The connection of ethnomusicology and ecomusicology. If AV archives can be made socially sustainable, then this is a great achievement. It was written by Rice. Social sustainability is largely neglected in mainstream sustainability debates. Priority has been given to economic and environmental sustainability, in particular in the context of planning, housing, and communities, where policy and investment has focused on renewable resources, low carbon communities, and encouraging pro-environmental behavior in households. But I think that social sustainability is a thing. However, it is widely a matter of reasoning that everything human has to be sustainable if humans fear being unsustainable. If AV archives can be made socially sustainable, then this is indeed a great achievement. It would break through the old circulation that concerts endanger the environmental health, so that politics take this fact as an excuse to not sustain them. The approach could be to make concerts as listening skills more feasible, to which would belong a more feasible movement policy and a more self-sufficient way of existing. Political stimulation can make it happen. Ecomusicology aims at showing the connections between human deeds regarding music and nature. Humans do something, the result in nature looks like that. Here you have an example. This duality actually imposes a big problem, as a human as such, as species, as culturally biased being, is possibly not seen as part of that nature. There were discussions whether social sustainability is a thing or not. I personally think that yes, and the current development proves it right. Personally, I think that culture will be soon replaced with individually conditioning. The current times demand it. All the criteria for individuation can also be met by a number of individuals as at the Shanghai Conservatory. Their choices were still pretty exclusively done, even in the training program. It was kind of obvious that the underlying program in early morning hours declared as discussion was as important to the organizers as the actual training. No discussions took really place. It was a promise to present that kept the entire event going. People were invited to present their future losses and ideas of conversation, and not so much to attend a training. Only very few did not present. The applause had to be repeated over the day for all the strangers that were welcome, but not as much as the early morning program, because in that context, the own people are more important than the guests. I think that this was the compromise. The training can only take place when the conservatory can spice up. If the conditions were right, and they were always right, then the training was helpful. Pure misunderstanding was the fact that the training program itself was already the spiciest ever. Just to summarize this, there is no duality. There is conditionality in everything. Time is one. AV materials become resources. Culture as a thing of a place is outdated as it was nationally bound and often time frameless. Is it a useless resource? No. It was teaching about past issues and about solutions that do not apply anymore. Socially sustainable is what can be reproduced without leaving a comfortable surrounding a place. This more or less unreal place will not be lost at any time. Friendship evolved during the morning speeches and positions were again described. The specific nature of humans' conditioning was at all levels followed. The only kid attending was especially exhibited.
I'm sure.
Looking at the place reserved for ethnomusicology and its continuation in ecomusicology, embracing nature and all beings, which is often seen as a sign of ecomusicology, compare Skippers and Bendrops, 2015. It seems easy to criticize a combination of differences, ecology and ethno anything. Ethno-ecology in music is probably too daring. There can be found in the classics human geography, and in the applied section there is human dimensions of conservation. Both fit the tradition in their way and might be used rather than not. The static view on existing items is probably the biggest hurdle in overcoming insecurities dealing with continuous decay. When asked what ecomusicology is about, it was hard to answer everything that does not fit into a given scheme. Compare Hubel and Ryan, 2021. The shortcut to environmentalists is not sufficient. Communicating conservation, social science results, implications, and policy recommendations to increase understanding and potential impact. You see here this game. That is, of course, not complete. Here we have the old-fashioned distinction of quantitative and qualitative studies of so-called science and the humanities. It's going directly through that. It is only spelled differently. When do scholars learn that things are part of and have a nature? That humans are also nature and that they are as well unpredictable as all other items. The imagined efficiency seen from the current view of point cannot hide that individuals will go their own way to their conditioned happiness. Is it true that the yellow background indicates missing communication skills? What if it is a biased assumption of item-driven science? Isn't ecomusicology and modern ethnomusicology also kind of item-driven? Don't they know about how to collaborate? I'm not sure. What if one only has to focus on the way of understanding and not on the way of how things are structured as text or numbers or visuals? Things that often are discussed in ethnomusicology as if it is item-driven, for instance, in music and well-being directions. Compare Trower, 2024. If AV archivists do find their collecting principles and follow strict, there are felt boundaries and really doomed things. One of them is a strictness as such that is at times interpreted as standing up to something. Another is the internal conditioning of the archiving unit, as for instance, the inability to decide urgent issues in the Ethnographic Museum of Berlin. It is the second time to try running a ICTMD symposium there, and the second time to find a wall of refuses. Nobody wanted to pay for the promises we made. It is really disturbing to experience the hardcore clinging towards traditionality, classical fieldwork, text and melody-based song analysis, as if the people who used them in their past are numb. They aren't. Everyone is getting a foot into the door of anything. Mostly cities attract cleanliness, speediness, richness in general attracts. The shortcut can be deadly, yet the pushing back into areas with little growth and financially suspicious activities cannot be the eternal solution. In other words, there does not exist a regrouping. I tried to explain it in a recent contribution. Elderly women had the education monopoly, as they have known the most of the past and transmitted that to the other younger females in the village. Yet the regrouping is actually the re-establishing of older groupings, if the social aspect does not change. Elderly women in that sense represent the most conservative group. The question is, does the social aspect have to change? Where did the social aspect change? I think that all social aspects changed everywhere, which can be a result of environmental issues and the migration from rural to urban spaces that took place over a longer period of time, not suddenly, not today. Whatsoever, the change is nowhere bigger when framing changed the individual conditions for production, reproduction, and the counterparts, such as, for instance, consumer behavior. Commoning is a counter movement fighting the loss of space for a community. Here are resources not wasted. The smallest niche or pocket is used to re-establish neighborhoods and the feeling of belonging to a group of people through making oneself useful to others. The problem was merely the same as everywhere. The corruption of humans of a group, for instance, in Berlin, of people through power and political decision-making possibilities is overwhelming. Small neighborhoods didn't learn to work together, but to fight against each other. Commoning also happens in archives, where the few people having a stable workplace feel more right than other users. Unfortunately, there are only little people with stable contracts. Also, the user is always in the center of economic interest. The user is also the only who can change the way of viewing the archives as unuseful supplements. Every place is always special in this case. The green is not the only thing that grows. I have a strange vision of the usefulness in ethnomusicology from the 1970s to the 2000. There was a social need of mass advertisements in the world of state monopolized economies, so ethnomusicology came handy in to advertise diversity, something that was considered a needed idea. Now these scholars and their followers become demanding and disturbing. Place is important to living spaces. Can be that the profiles of people change and the requirements and burdens. Yet place might become again important as living spaces of humans. Architecture, dance, and music might be important fields of self-development. They have to be done rather than to be consumed. Let's therefore hope that there will be a specific economy recognizing this need and allowing for growth of these ideas. What is definitely out? That could be traditionality, classical fieldwork, text and melody-based song analysis, as we can experience it in many writings that are based fully on Nettle and Merriam, who offered 4 goals of ethnomusicology. One was help protect and explain non-Western music. Save folk music before it disappears in the modern world. Study music as a means of communication to further world understanding. And provide an avenue for wider exploration and reflection for those interested in primitive studies. It is time to counter that. These are the references to be considered. It is really eye-opening to read through that. So in case that anyone wants to know more, here are the sources. Many thanks for watching and listening. That's all. I don't hear you.
Good to see you, Gisa. Do you have time for a few questions if people have them?
I have.
Anyone have any questions? It's a lot to consider, and then I hadn't thought so specifically about the application of social sciences, especially I'm often thinking about that from sort of the data curation and research side of things. But do you see any major evolution in the social sciences as applied to ethnomusicological studies? I mean, clearly you've laid out a really connected picture there, but do you see anything bringing you sort of hope given the context of the World Wide Web and the way we continue to use it and how it affects our culture, specifically in music?
Yes, I want to answer this question. Thank you for that. I think there's only one musicology. And whether we call it ethnomusicology or not, it doesn't matter.
Right.
I think that I feel that many people would agree to that rather than not. There's only one musicology. And this has to develop, of course, with the help of new tools.
Right.
Yes.
Please.
Yes, thank you for your presentation. And it made me think the ecomusicology and with the work of Murat Schaffer, for instance, and acoustic ecology, and all the soundscape studies that exist. And I wonder if you make links with that.
Actually, I have seen only today presentations. Yesterday, I could not get in yet. But I have to say that I'm very happy that many people pick this up. And I have seen also in other presentations that, for example, in the previous presentation, that people tried to develop something, but this project-based thing will disappear. We will be sure that it will disappear. So we have to work it out on our own, in our reality, in our direct connection to the world. We cannot wait until someone is coming and doing it for us or giving us a project.
Is this research that you've seen here? Or is this previous to the conference?
In the field of ecomusicology, of acoustic ecology, of some case studies, and I was wondering with if Gisa is making links with that, but she has answered like a few points of that.
Other thoughts, questions? We also still have Louise on, and since I was moderating both sessions, I think questions for both Gisa and Louise are on the table, should we have them. I was actually just messaged Louise right before Gisa had started about sort of concepts in documentation as guide. And I think, what was the term you used, Louise, if you're still there? Let's see here, instructions. And I was thinking about that in terms of, say, avant-garde composition in the music realm, where instruction goes beyond the actual sort of composition, timbre, etc. expression, into very creative uses and applications of how you strike an instrument, for instance, So thinking about how the creation, at the point of creation, things are sort of contextualized, which is a pretty fascinating thing to think about. I hadn't necessarily moved toward the space of art installation, although there has been a lot of research in how to document performance, etc.
Yeah, certainly from my point of view, Fluxus works, some of you will know Fluxus instruction-based artwork from the 50s and the 60s through to the 90s, really. The other thing for me is that, of course, one of my motivations, I think, is connected with Lisa's talk, which is, I mean, there's a lot of complex ideas in there, so forgive me if I've misunderstood. But we work, many of us have worked for institutions. Australian conservators, one of the leaders in the Australian conservation field is very big on this challenge that there's such a lot of material that is not in institutions that is important to people. And that's something that I work on in a bunch of different ways, partly through this work with instructions, because these are works that institutions don't want because they think they're too hard to preserve. So that's where I started with this, that's where we started with this work, was we think these works are really important. They're really interesting to us as artists, but institutions don't really know what to do with them. So our kind of activism as practitioners with archival know-how, I guess, and quite a few of the talks across the conference have been talking about that importance of empowering others to act. And I guess I feel that's a really important one. But you've heard from me already. Someone else in the room chime in on this conversation. So many clever people here.
That is true. We've got a couple minutes left in the session time. I don't want to keep anyone from food, and then of course the subsequent sessions after that. Does anybody have any last thoughts or comments? Of course, both of our speakers are available for contact and would probably be happy to hear from you. All right, well, I guess we'll leave it there. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much for the opportunity.
Absolutely, happy to. Take good care, and Gisa, take good care. It's lovely to see you, as always.